I walked through our front door at 11:30 that Tuesday night, my warehouse uniform still damp with sweat, and found my father Robert standing in the kitchen like a volcano ready to explode. His face blazed crimson veins bulging across his forehead as he gripped the counter with white knuckles. Without any warning, without even a hello, he erupted at me. "All you do is take. You've never given this family anything." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. My mother Susan froze by the sink dish towel, clutched in her trembling hands. Amanda, my 20-year-old sister, appeared around the corner from the living room, her eyes wide with shock. Dad kept going, his voice rising with each accusation, demanding that I leave immediately if I had any shred of pride remaining in my body. What my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been living a double life for the past 3 years. While they saw me as their disappointing son, who barely scraped by, I had been working 2 full-time jobs to secretly pay for Amanda's college education and keep our family afloat financially. It started during my junior year at community college, when Amanda got accepted to State University for her pre-med program. The tuition was $12,000 per year, and I watched my parents' faces crumble when they realized they couldn't afford it. Dad had been laid off from his manufacturing job 8 months earlier, and Mom's part-time position at Patterson's Grocery barely covered our weekly food budget. That night, I made a decision that would define the next 3 years of my life. I dropped out of community college, took on a night shift at Morrison Warehouse, after my day job at Fletcher Accounting, and secretly began covering Amanda's tuition payments. Every morning, I'd drag myself out of bed at 6:30, shower quickly, and arrive at Fletcher Accounting by 8. I spent 9 hours processing invoices and managing client accounts, earning $15 per hour. Most people would go home after that, maybe grab dinner with friends, or relax in front of the television. Instead, I'd wolf down a sandwich in my car drive 20 minutes across town to Morrison Warehouse, and spend 5 more hours loading trucks until midnight. The physical exhaustion was crushing. My muscles ached constantly from lifting 50-pound boxes of electronics and appliances. My hands developed permanent calluses, and my back throbbed every morning when I woke up. But the emotional weight was even heavier. I moved out of my childhood bedroom into a tiny studio apartment on Elm Street, telling my parents I wanted independence. The truth was, I needed to hide my double income and create a believable story about struggling financially. My apartment had secondhand furniture, a mattress on the floor, and a refrigerator that hummed so loudly I couldn't sleep near the kitchen. Meanwhile, I was transferring $12,000 every August to State University for Amanda's tuition. I also picked up our family's health insurance premiums through my benefits at Fletcher Accounting, telling my parents the company had some special program for employee families. Another $400 monthly went to what I called grocery help, but which I knew was actually keeping Mom and Dad current on their mortgage payments. Amanda thrived at State University, maintaining a 3.8 GPA in her pre-med courses. She'd call home excitedly about her organic chemistry labs and her acceptance into the campus research program. During those conversations, I'd sit in my cramped apartment eating ramen noodles exhausted from another 14-hour workday, and feel a deep satisfaction knowing that her success was built on my sacrifices. The hardest part wasn't the physical exhaustion or the financial strain. It was listening to my father lecture me about responsibility and ambition during Sunday dinners. He'd criticize my tiny apartment and my paycheck-to-paycheck lifestyle, suggesting that I lacked drive and maturity. If only he knew that, while he couldn't find employment anywhere, I was working 70 hours per week to support his family. I developed an elaborate system to hide my warehouse job from them. I kept a change of clothes in my car, showered at the warehouse facility, and always had a cover story ready when they asked about my schedule. When Amanda mentioned seeing someone who looked like me at the warehouse district, I claimed I was visiting a friend who worked there. The secrecy ate at me, but I convinced myself it was necessary. Amanda needed to focus on her studies without feeling guilty. Mom and Dad needed to maintain their dignity during Dad's unemployment. And frankly, I wasn't sure they'd accept my help if they knew the truth about where it was coming from. Last week, I had signed Amanda's fall semester tuition check, sitting in my car outside the bank. As I watched the $12,000 transfer from my account, I thought about the irony. Tomorrow, Dad would probably give me another lecture about financial responsibility over Sunday dinner, completely unaware that I had just paid more in one transaction than he'd earned in the past 6 months. Looking back at that moment in the kitchen with Dad's angry words still echoing in my ears, I realized that all my sacrifice had been invisible to them. In their eyes, I was just their underachieving son, who worked a basic office job and lived in a crappy apartment. They had no idea that their comfortable lifestyle was funded by my warehouse shifts, or that Amanda's education was possible because I hadn't taken a real day off in 3 years. What made Dad's accusations even more painful was discovering that he had been lying to our extended family about his employment situation, essentially taking credit for my financial support without even knowing it. 2 months earlier, at my cousin Jake's wedding, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. Uncle Paul approached Dad during the reception, slapping him on the back and saying, "Robert, I heard your consulting business is really taking off. Susan mentioned you landed some major contracts with manufacturing companies." Dad's response floored me. Without missing a beat, he smiled confidently and replied, "Business has been good, Paul. Can't complain. You know how it is with specialized knowledge in my field." I stood there holding my plate of wedding cake, watching my father accept congratulations for a consulting business that didn't exist. Over the following weeks, I pieced together the elaborate story my parents had constructed to explain their maintained lifestyle during Dad's unemployment. According to their version, Dad had transitioned from traditional employment to high-level consulting work for small manufacturers. This fictional career change explained why he didn't have a regular office to visit, why his schedule was flexible, and most importantly, how they continued paying their bills despite his layoff. Mom had become an active participant in this deception. When neighbors asked about Dad's work, she'd explain that he was between major projects, or focusing on strategic consulting rather than day-to-day operations. Amanda, away at college, had completely bought into the story. During our phone conversation, she'd mentioned how proud she was that Dad had successfully reinvented his career. The reality was dramatically different. I discovered the truth during one of my rare afternoons off, when I stopped by the house to help Mom with some yard work. Dad wasn't home, supposedly meeting with potential clients, so I decided to organize the garage while Mom ran errands. Hidden behind stacks of old paint cans, I found a cardboard box filled with rejection letters from employers across the state. Dad had been applying for jobs, constantly receiving dozens of form letters politely declining his applications. Some were for positions far below his previous manufacturing supervisor role, warehouse worker, security guard, even part-time retail associate. The rejections painted a picture of a man desperately trying to find any employment while maintaining the facade that he was successfully self-employed. One letter from Henderson Manufacturing was particularly brutal, stating that his skills were no longer aligned with current industry standards, and suggesting he consider alternative career paths outside manufacturing. I felt sick reading those letters, not because Dad was struggling to find work, but because he was too proud to admit his challenges, while simultaneously criticizing my work ethic and financial choices. My resentment grew stronger during family dinners, when Dad would offer unsolicited advice about money management and career advancement. Just 3 weeks before our kitchen confrontation, he had lectured me about building an emergency fund, completely unaware that his family's emergency fund was my paycheck from Fletcher Accounting, and that their mortgage payments depended on my warehouse overtime. The breaking point came when I overheard Dad talking to Mom about Amanda's upcoming semester. "We're so fortunate that my consulting income is stable enough to support her education," he said. "Too many families struggle with college costs these days." I wanted to scream. Every cent of Amanda's tuition came from my exhausted body loading trucks until midnight. Yet, Dad was patting himself on the back for providing educational opportunities. The consulting income he referenced was entirely fictional, a story he told himself to avoid confronting the reality that his unemployed status was being covered by his son's sacrifice. During that same conversation, Dad criticized my lifestyle choices, telling Mom that I needed to learn what real sacrifice looks like, and that my generation didn't understand the value of hard work. I was sitting in the living room ostensibly watching television while secretly listening to my father dismiss my work ethic. The irony was devastating. I was sacrificing more than he could imagine, working harder than I ever thought possible, while he lectured me about responsibility from the comfort of a home that my labor was maintaining. Amanda's innocent comments during family gatherings became increasingly painful to hear. She'd gush about how lucky she felt that Dad's business was thriving during tough economic times, how grateful she was that her parents could provide such educational opportunities, and how much she appreciated their financial stability, while many of her classmates worried about student loans. I started avoiding family dinners, claiming work obligations or social commitments. The truth was that I couldn't bear sitting at a table funded by my money while listening to lectures about my lack of contribution to the family. My absence became another source of criticism, with Dad suggesting that I was becoming selfish and disconnected from family values. The final straw came 3 days before our confrontation. I was leaving the warehouse after an especially brutal 10-hour shift, my uniform soaked with sweat, and my shoulders aching from repetitive lifting. As I walked to my car, I noticed Dad's sedan parked across the street. For a moment, I thought he might have discovered my second job, but when I approached his vehicle, I realized he was asleep in the driver's seat. Dad woke up when I tapped on his window, looking disoriented and embarrassed. After some awkward conversation, he admitted that he'd been taking some time to think about business opportunities in various parking lots around town. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. My father was spending his days sitting in parking lots, maintaining the illusion that he was actively working while actually having nowhere to go. I offered to grab coffee and talk, but Dad declined, insisting that he had client calls to make from his car. As I watched him drive away, I realized that his pride was so overwhelming that he'd rather live in elaborate deception than accept help or admit struggle. Meanwhile, his criticism of my work ethic and financial decisions continued unabated. That night, sitting in my apartment, surrounded by the secondhand furniture that allowed me to funnel money toward his family's survival, I felt a rage building that I couldn't contain. I was working myself into exhaustion to maintain his dignity, and in return, he was treating me like a disappointment who needed constant guidance about responsibility and sacrifice. After Dad's explosion in the kitchen, something inside me snapped completely. I didn't argue, didn't defend myself, didn't explain the truth that would have stopped his tirade instantly. Instead, I walked upstairs to my old bedroom and began packing the few personal belongings I'd left behind when I moved out. Mom followed me, wringing her hands and speaking in the gentle tone she'd used to mediate family conflicts since I was a child. "Kane, honey, your father is just stressed about work. You know how he gets when he's worried about money. Maybe you could apologize for coming home so late, and we can all sit down tomorrow and work this out." I continued folding my college sweatshirts and high school yearbooks into a duffel bag, not trusting myself to speak. Mom's suggestion that I apologize for working until midnight to pay their bills was so absurd that I almost laughed. "He didn't mean what he said about you never giving anything to the family," she continued. "You know your father loves you. He's just frustrated because he wants to see you succeed, and sometimes that comes out wrong." Amanda appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Kane, please don't leave like this. Dad was totally out of line, but this isn't how our family handles problems. We talk things through. We stick together." For a moment, looking at Amanda's distressed expression, I almost weakened, almost explained everything, almost revealed the truth that would instantly shift the family dynamics and prove my worth. But then, I heard Dad downstairs, still muttering angrily about ungrateful children and learning life lessons, and my resolve hardened. "I'm leaving," I told them quietly, zipping my bag closed. Dad made his feelings clear. I drove back to my apartment that night with a strange sense of clarity. For 3 years, I had been enabling Dad's pride and Mom's avoidance of difficult financial realities. I had allowed them to maintain comfortable illusions while I sacrificed everything to support their lifestyle. Now, for the first time since Dad's layoff, they would experience the authentic consequences of their situation. Wednesday morning, I called Fletcher Accounting and used 3 sick days to handle personal business. My first stop was State University's billing department, where I canceled Amanda's automatic tuition payments for the spring semester. The administrative clerk seemed confused by my request, asking multiple times if I was sure about discontinuing the quarterly installments that had been coming from my account for 3 years. Next, I visited the health insurance office and removed my parents and Amanda from my family coverage plan. The representative warned me about the 30-day grace period and the importance of ensuring they had alternative coverage arranged. I provided the required documentation and scheduled the termination for the end of the month. My final stop was the bank where I closed the shared account I'd established for transferring grocery money to my parents. Over the past year, that account had provided nearly $500 monthly money I now realized had been going directly toward their mortgage payments rather than food expenses. By Thursday evening, I had systematically severed every financial connection to my family. For the first time in 3 years, my entire paycheck belonged to me. The feeling was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. I used the money I'd normally send for Amanda's tuition to furnish my apartment properly. I bought a real bed frame, a comfortable couch, and a television larger than 13 inches. I stocked my refrigerator with actual food instead of ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. I even treated myself to dinner at Romano's Italian restaurant, ordering wine with my meal and enjoying a level of comfort I'd forgotten existed. Meanwhile, my family assumed this was a temporary tantrum that would resolve itself within a few days. Mom called twice during the week, asking if I wanted to come for Sunday dinner and suggesting that Dad was ready to discuss things calmly. Amanda sent text messages about funny things happening in her classes, maintaining our normal communication pattern. Dad predictably remained silent. His pride prevented him from reaching out directly, but I could sense through Mom's calls that he expected me to apologize and return to the family fold without any acknowledgement of his behavior or my contributions. By the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after our confrontation, I had experienced 7 consecutive nights of 8-hour sleep schedules. Without warehouse shifts consuming my evenings, I discovered energy levels I'd forgotten existed. I started reading books again, something I hadn't done since beginning my double work schedule. I even accepted social invitations from coworkers at Fletcher Accounting, people who'd given up asking me to happy hour events years ago. The most revealing change was my perspective on Dad's criticism. For 3 years, his lectures about financial responsibility had made me feel defensive and inadequate, despite knowing I was supporting his family. Now, with distance and clarity, I could see those lectures for what they really were: projection from a man who felt powerless about his own financial situation and needed to maintain authority by criticizing others. Amanda's first worried text arrived exactly 10 days after I left. "Kane, I got some weird notice from the university about my account. Can you call me?" I stared at the message for several minutes before turning off my phone without responding. Mom's next call came 2 days later, her voice carrying a note of concern I hadn't heard before. "Kane, honey, Amanda mentioned some confusion about her tuition payments. Do you know anything about that? Also, your father got a notice about our health insurance changing. Could you give me a call when you have a chance?" I listened to her voicemail 3 times before deleting it. The consequences of my departure were beginning to surface, but my family still hadn't connected my absence with their emerging financial problems. They assumed these issues were coincidental timing, unrelated to my decision to leave the house after Dad's outburst. As the second week progressed, I watched my family's situation develop with the detached fascination of someone observing a social experiment. They had spent 3 years benefiting from my financial support while remaining completely unaware of its source. Now they would discover what their actual income could and couldn't sustain. By week 3, my phone was buzzing regularly with calls from Mom and text messages from Amanda. I ignored them all, maintaining my decision to let natural consequences play out, rather than rushing in to rescue them from problems they hadn't acknowledged I was solving. Exactly 31 days after I walked out of that kitchen, my phone rang at 7:45 in the evening. Amanda's name appeared on the screen, and something about the timing felt significant enough that I answered. "Kane." She sobbed before I could even say hello. "Oh my God, Kane, what's happening?" My tuition payment was declined, and when I called the university, they said the account that's been paying my bills for 3 years just stopped. There's some hold on my registration for next semester, and I don't understand what's going on. Her voice broke completely, and I could hear her crying so hard that she couldn't catch her breath. The sound pierced through all my resolve and anger, hitting me directly in the heart. "Amanda," I said gently, "slow down. Take a deep breath and tell me exactly what the university told you." "They said my automatic tuition payments stopped 3 weeks ago," she managed between sobs. "Kane, I never even knew there were automatic payments. Mom and Dad always told me they were handling everything directly. But now, the billing office is saying someone else has been paying my tuition this whole time, and that person canceled all future payments." My chest tightened as I realized Amanda was putting the pieces together in real time. The lady in the billing office showed me payment records going back 3 years. Amanda continued, her voice becoming smaller and more confused. "Kane, she said the payments have been coming from a Kane Mitchell account at First National Bank." "Kane, that's you, isn't it?" The question hung in the air between us. I could lie, could claim it was some mix-up with names, could maintain the illusion that had protected her from guilt for 3 years. But looking around my apartment, furnished for the first time with comfortable furniture, bought with money I'd normally send to the university, I couldn't continue the deception. "Yes," I said simply. Amanda was quiet for so long that I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Kane, you've been paying my tuition this whole time for 3 years. That's why you moved out, isn't it? That's why you live in that tiny apartment and never have money for anything nice. Oh my God. Kane, what have I done?" "You haven't done anything wrong," I told her quickly. "You've worked hard in school, you've earned every grade, and you deserve your education. This was my choice." "But I knew," she said, crying again. "Kane, I've known for months that you were paying my tuition." This revelation shocked me completely. "What do you mean you knew?" "Last spring when I came home for Easter weekend, I saw you getting out of your car wearing that blue warehouse uniform. You were so tired, you didn't even notice me watching from the kitchen window. I asked Mom why you were dressed like that, and she said you must have been helping a friend move or something." Amanda paused, sniffling loudly before continuing her confession. "But then, I started paying attention to your schedule, Kane. You'd arrive at family dinners exhausted with cuts and calluses on your hands. You'd fall asleep on the couch after eating because you were so tired. And you always smelled like cardboard and machinery, even after showering." I sat down heavily on my couch, realizing that my careful deception hadn't been as successful as I'd believed. I did some research and found out Morrison Warehouse pays $18 per hour for night shift workers. Amanda continued. "I calculated the hours you'd need to work there to afford my tuition, and Kane, it matched exactly with your exhaustion levels and your mysterious evening schedule." "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. "Because I could see what it was costing you," she said, her voice breaking again. "You looked so tired all the time, Kane. You'd stopped talking about your friends, you never went out anymore. You were wearing the same clothes from high school because you couldn't afford to buy anything new. I knew that if I confronted you about paying my tuition, you'd just work harder to make sure I didn't feel guilty about it." The complexity of Amanda's position was becoming clear to me. She'd known about my sacrifice, but had remained silent to protect me from feeling pressured to do even more. "I got a job at Stella's Coffee on campus," she continued. "I've been working 15 hours per week since last September trying to save money to pay you back somehow. I figured after graduation I could surprise you with a check and a thank you card or something. Kane, I've been so grateful for what you were doing, but I was scared that if I acknowledged it, you'd feel obligated to do more. Hearing Amanda's perspective completely changed my understanding of the past year. While I'd thought she was oblivious to my sacrifice, she'd actually been working her own part-time job to reduce my burden. Amanda, do Mom and Dad know? I asked. That's the horrible part, she said. They have absolutely no idea. When I got this tuition notice, I asked Mom about the payment system, and she just kept saying Dad handles all the education expenses through his consulting income. Kane, she genuinely believes that Dad's fictional consulting business is paying for my college. The magnitude of my parents' ignorance was staggering. Not only were they unaware of my financial support, but they had created such elaborate stories about Dad's employment success that they couldn't even recognize their authentic financial reality. Amanda, they're about to face some serious problems, I warned her. What do you mean? I explained about the health insurance cancellation, the stopped mortgage assistance, and the elimination of the grocery money that had been supporting their monthly expenses. Kane. Amanda whispered, Mom and Dad are about to lose the house, aren't they? I didn't answer, but my silence confirmed her fears. I have to tell them, she said. They need to know what you've been doing. They need to understand that you've been supporting this family for 3 years, while Dad lectures you about financial responsibility. Amanda, wait, I said. Let them figure out their situation first. Let them understand what their real income can and can't support. Then, if you want to explain things, you can. But right now, they need to face reality, without someone swooping in to rescue them immediately. Amanda agreed, though I could hear her struggling with the decision. Before hanging up, she asked one more question that revealed how much she'd been thinking about this situation. Kane, when you walked out after Dad yelled at you about never giving the family anything, how did you not just scream the truth at him right then? Because I said slowly, I realized that if I had to scream my worth at them, then they didn't actually value what I was doing. They valued the comfort my money provided, but they didn't value me. That's why you texted back, thought I never gave this family anything, when I asked about the tuition payments, isn't it? Yes. Amanda was quiet for a moment before saying, Kane, I love you, and I see everything you've sacrificed for us. When this is all over, I want you to know that your little sister notices and appreciates what you did, even if our parents were too blind to see it. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Amanda's awareness and gratitude meant more to me than any acknowledgement from my parents could have. But it also made me realize how much my parents' blindness had cost our entire family. Week 5 brought the foreclosure notice. Amanda called me immediately after Mom found the certified letter in their mailbox. Kane, Mom is having a complete meltdown. The mortgage company is saying they missed their first payment, and there's some 30-day notice about foreclosure proceedings. Mom keeps saying there must be some mistake, because Dad's consulting payments have been regular. I could hear Mom crying in the background, her voice high and panicked, as she spoke to someone on the phone. Amanda continued in a whisper. She's calling the bank right now, insisting that there's been some computer error. Kane, she really doesn't understand that the money for their mortgage has been coming from you. The foreclosure notice was just the beginning. By week 6, the family's carefully maintained facade began crumbling in devastating ways that even I hadn't anticipated. The first major revelation came when Dad was forced to admit the truth about his consulting business. Susan discovered a credit card statement hidden in the garage, showing $12,000 in cash advances and online gambling charges. When confronted, Dad finally confessed that he'd been using credit cards to maintain their lifestyle during his unemployment, convinced that his luck would turn around either through employment or gambling winnings. Me, Kane. Amanda reported during one of our daily check-in calls. Dad had to admit that he's been unemployed for 10 months, not running some successful consulting business. Mom found evidence that he's been borrowing against his retirement fund, to pay for groceries and utilities. And get this, he's been gambling online during the day, thinking he could win enough money to pay everything back before anyone noticed. The depth of Dad's deception stunned me. While I'd been working night shifts to support the family, he'd been digging them deeper into debt through desperate gambling and borrowing against their future. Amanda had followed my advice and confronted our parents with bank statements showing my 3 years of financial support. I showed them copies of every tuition payment. Kane. Dad's face went completely white when he saw the amounts. Mom started crying and asking why you never told them. And Dad just kept saying, "That can't be right. That can't be right." Like seeing the evidence would make it disappear. The confrontation with documented proof created a crisis that extended far beyond their financial problems. Dad's identity as the family provider, already shattered by unemployment, was now completely destroyed by evidence that his son had been the actual breadwinner for years. Dad got angry, Amanda continued. Not apologetic, Kane. Angry. He started yelling about how you should have told them, how you made him look like a fool in front of the family, how this was some kind of manipulation on your part. He actually said that you paying my tuition without telling them was sneaky and underhanded. Dad's response revealed the core of his personality in a way that months of family dinners never had. Faced with evidence of my sacrifice and his deception, his first instinct was to blame me for making him look bad, rather than acknowledging what I'd done for the family. Mom's reaction was different, but equally telling. According to Amanda, she called me repeatedly, not to apologize or acknowledge my contributions, but to demand that I stop punishing the family and resume my financial support immediately. She keeps saying that you're being vindictive, Amanda reported. She wants you to restart the tuition payments and help with the mortgage because that's what family does for each other. Kane, she still doesn't understand that you've been doing that for 3 years already. By week 7, the practical consequences of my absence had created a domino effect throughout their lives. The family car was repossessed when they couldn't make payments that I'd been covering through my grocery money contributions. Their health insurance was canceled, leaving Mom vulnerable since she had been scheduled for some medical tests her doctor had recommended. The utilities began shutting off systematically. First the cable and internet, then the electricity, and finally the water service. Each disconnection notice surprised Mom, who couldn't understand why their regular payment plan had suddenly stopped working. Amanda moved back to her campus dormitory full-time, using money from her coffee shop job to avoid the chaos at home. "I can't study there anymore," she explained. "They're staying with Aunt Carol temporarily, and Dad spends all day on her computer, applying for jobs while Mom cries about losing the house. It's too depressing, Kane." The most devastating discovery came when Amanda investigated their complete financial picture. "Kane, I went through all their papers while they were out job hunting. They owe $18,000 on credit cards. They're 4 months behind on their mortgage, even with your help, and Dad emptied his entire retirement account. Even if you came back and resumed everything, they'd still lose the house." This revelation changed my perspective completely. I had assumed that my financial support was helping a family temporarily weather Dad's unemployment. Instead, I had been enabling them to avoid confronting a financial crisis that was much deeper than I'd realized. "There's more," Amanda said during our next conversation. "I found job applications going back 8 months, Kane. Dad hasn't just been unlucky with employment. He's been getting interviews and then getting rejected because he doesn't have current skills for modern manufacturing. Some companies told him he'd need additional training or certification, but instead of pursuing that, he kept applying for jobs he wasn't qualified for. Dad's approach to unemployment was as unrealistic as his approach to family finances. Rather than adapting to changed job market requirements, he had maintained elaborate pretenses while the family situation deteriorated beyond recovery. Susan's sister Carol provided temporary housing, but she also provided unwelcome clarity about the family situation. Carol had always been the practical sibling, working as a nurse, and managing her own finances responsibly. Her reaction to learning about my financial support and Dad's deception was swift and unforgiving. Aunt Carol told Dad he had exactly 2 weeks to find any employment and start contributing to household expenses, or they'd need to find somewhere else to stay, Amanda reported. She said she wasn't going to enable their fantasy lifestyle any longer. Carol's ultimatum forced Dad to accept jobs he'd previously considered beneath his qualifications. Within days, he'd found part-time work at a hardware store and begun applying for warehouse positions similar to my night job at Morrison. The irony is incredible, Amanda observed. Dad is now working the same type of job he used to criticize you for making half the money you were earning, and finally understanding how physically demanding this work actually is. Meanwhile, I was experiencing life without the burden of supporting 3 other adults. For the first time in years, I had disposable income for hobbies, social activities, and long-term savings. I joined a recreational basketball league, bought decent clothes, and even started dating Sarah, a colleague from Fletcher Accounting, who'd always seemed interested, but whom I'd never had time to pursue. The contrast between my improving life and my family's collapsing situation should have made me feel guilty. Instead, I felt a strange sense of justice. After years of invisible sacrifice, met with criticism and lectures, I was finally experiencing the life my education and work ethic should have provided, while they were finally experiencing the consequences of their actual financial decisions. But the most painful part of this period was watching Amanda struggle with divided loyalties. She loved our parents and wanted to help them, but she also understood that my decision to stop enabling their irresponsible behavior was ultimately necessary for their growth. "Sometimes I think you should just come back and fix everything," she admitted during one of our calls. But then, I remember how miserable and exhausted you were, and I realized that you were sacrificing your entire future to maintain their illusions. That wasn't sustainable, Kane. Something had to change. Everything changed when my warehouse supervisor, Marcus, called me on a Saturday morning 8 weeks after I'd left home. "Kane, I need to ask you about something weird," Marcus said, his voice carrying a tone of confusion that immediately put me on alert. "A guy came by yesterday claiming to be your father applying for your old night shift position. But here's the thing. He was bad-mouthing you during the interview, saying you were unreliable and had never held a job for more than 6 months. My blood ran cold as Marcus continued. "I told him that was impossible, because you worked here for 3 years, with perfect attendance, but he insisted I was confusing you with someone else. Kane, this man was actively trying to damage your reputation while applying for your job. What the hell is going on?" The betrayal hit me harder than anything Dad had said during our kitchen confrontation. While I'd been sacrificing my health and social life to support his family, he'd been attempting to sabotage my professional reputation to advance his own employment prospects. "Marcus, what exactly did he say about me?" I asked, needing to understand the full extent of Dad's betrayal. "He claimed you'd been fired from multiple jobs for showing up late, that you had a history of calling in sick regularly, and that you'd never demonstrated any real work ethic or reliability." "Kane, I've been supervising you for 3 years. I know you showed up every single night, worked overtime whenever we needed it, and never once called in sick. This guy was straight up lying about you." Marcus paused before delivering the most devastating detail. "He also said you'd been living off your parents financially, never contributing anything to household expenses, and that your family had finally gotten tired of supporting your lazy lifestyle. Kane, he was presenting himself as the hard-working father who was stepping up after his disappointing son had failed to launch." The psychological manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Dad had constructed a narrative where my 3 years of financial sacrifice became evidence of my laziness, where my warehouse job became proof of my unreliability, and where his unemployment became a noble attempt to clean up after my failures. "There's more," Marcus continued. "He brought copies of job applications showing my company name as his previous employer, claiming he'd worked here for 3 years. Kane, he was literally trying to steal your work experience and use it as his own employment history." I felt physically sick. Dad hadn't just been lying to preserve his pride. He'd been actively working to destroy my reputation and steal credit for my accomplishments. "Marcus, did you hire him?" "Hell no," Marcus replied immediately. I told him there was obviously some family dispute happening that I didn't want any part of, and that his claims about you directly contradicted my personal knowledge of your character and work performance. I also mentioned that lying on job applications and slandering former employees were serious red flags that made him unsuitable for any position with our company. After hanging up with Marcus, I sat in my apartment trying to process the magnitude of Dad's betrayal. It was one thing for him to be unaware of my financial contributions. It was entirely different for him to actively attempt to harm my career prospects while stealing my work history. I called Amanda immediately and recounted my conversation with Marcus. "Kane, that's horrible," she said, genuinely shocked by Dad's behavior. "But it explains something weird that happened this week. Dad came home talking about how he'd straightened out some misconceptions about our family situation during job interviews. I thought he meant he was being honest about his unemployment, but now I think he meant he was blaming you for everything." Amanda paused before continuing with obvious reluctance. "There's something else, Kane. Uncle Paul called yesterday asking Mom why you'd been telling people that Dad wasn't really working. Mom was confused because you hadn't been talking to anyone in the family. But Uncle Paul said his friend Mike, who works in manufacturing, mentioned that someone was spreading rumors about Dad, lying about his employment history." The pieces clicked together immediately. Dad's job applications and interviews had created a network of professional connections who were now comparing notes about conflicting stories regarding our family situation. His lies were catching up with him in ways that extended beyond our immediate family. "Amanda, did Dad mention any specific companies where he'd used my work experience as his own?" "He's been telling Mom about interviews at 3 different warehouses and 2 manufacturing companies. Kane, if he's been claiming your employment history at all these places, and they start comparing notes or doing background checks." The implications were staggering. Dad's fraud could potentially damage my professional reputation across multiple companies in our area. Worse, if employers discovered his deception, they might assume I was complicit in the scheme. I spent the rest of Saturday documenting everything, printing 3 years of pay stubs, performance reviews, and employment records from both Fletcher Accounting and Morrison Warehouse. I gathered bank statements showing my tuition payments and family support contributions. I compiled a timeline of Dad's unemployment and our family's financial situation. By Sunday evening, I had assembled a comprehensive file proving my employment history, my financial contributions to the family, and the timeline of Dad's deception. The documentation was thorough enough to protect my professional reputation and expose the extent of his lies. Monday morning brought an unexpected phone call that would complete the picture of Dad's betrayal. Kane Mitchell. The voice was unfamiliar and professional. "This is David Anderson from Henderson Manufacturing. I'm calling because your father listed you as a character reference on his job application, but some of the information he provided doesn't match our employment verification process." My heart sank as I realized Dad had involved me directly in his deception. "Mr. Mitchell, your father claims that you can verify his 3 years of warehouse experience and confirm his strong work ethic and reliability. However, when we contacted Morrison Warehouse for verification, they indicated that Robert Mitchell had never been employed there, but that you had worked night shift for 3 years with excellent performance." The call confirmed my worst fears. Dad wasn't just stealing my work experience. He was using my name and reputation to support his fraudulent claims. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask directly, did your father work at Morrison Warehouse? And would you be willing to provide a character reference supporting his employment application?" I took a deep breath before responding with complete honesty. "Sir, my father has been unemployed for 10 months. He has never worked at Morrison Warehouse. I worked there for 3 years while he was looking for employment. He should not have listed me as a reference, and I cannot provide any verification for work experience he doesn't possess." After hanging up, I realized that Dad's desperation had escalated beyond family deception into outright professional fraud that could have legal consequences. His willingness to damage my reputation and steal my accomplishments revealed a level of selfishness that made his kitchen tirade about my lack of contribution seem almost insignificant by comparison. That evening, Amanda called with news that would begin the final phase of our family's crisis. "Kane, you got a phone call at Aunt Carol's house. Some man named David calling about Dad's job application." Carol answered and told him about Dad's situation, including the part about you supporting the family for 3 years. Kane, I think Dad's lies are about to catch up with him in a very public way. The conversation with David Anderson had apparently prompted calls to other companies where Dad had submitted fraudulent applications. By Tuesday, Amanda reported that 3 different employers had contacted family members asking for verification of Dad's employment claims. "Aunt Carol is furious," Amanda said. She told Dad that lying on job applications was probably illegal and that involving you in his deception could damage your career. She gave him 24 hours to call every company and withdraw his applications, or she'd call them herself to report the fraud. Dad's response to Carol's ultimatum revealed the full extent of his character breakdown. Instead of accepting responsibility, he blamed me for sabotaging his job prospects by working at Morrison Warehouse and creating confusion about his employment history. He actually told Aunt Carol that you should have informed him about your warehouse job so he could avoid applying there. Amanda reported, incredulous. "Kane, he's claiming that your secret employment made his fraud your fault." But the most devastating revelation came when Carol began investigating Dad's activities during his months of supposed job searching. "Kane," Amanda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Aunt Carol found gambling websites in Dad's internet browser history, going back 8 months. She also found correspondence with some financial advisor about liquidating retirement accounts. Dad wasn't just lying about employment. He's been actively making their financial situation worse while you were working to support them." The complete picture of Dad's behavior during my 3 years of sacrifice was finally coming into focus. While I'd been exhausting myself to maintain his family's stability, he'd been gambling, lying, and making decisions that undermined everything I was trying to accomplish. Wednesday afternoon brought the phone call that would force our final confrontation. The call came at 6:15 p.m. on a Wednesday, exactly 9 weeks after I'd walked out of that kitchen. Dad's number appeared on my phone screen for the first time since our confrontation. "Kane." His voice was barely recognizable, rough and broken in ways I'd never heard before. "Son, I need to talk to you." I waited silently, refusing to make this conversation easier for him. "I just got off the phone with David Anderson from Henderson Manufacturing." Dad continued, his words coming slowly, as if each one physically hurt to speak. "Kane, he told me that you protected my reputation when he called, asking about my application. You could have destroyed me completely, told him everything about what I've been doing. But you just said I was unemployed and looking for work." The vulnerability in Dad's voice was startling after months of angry pride and defensive blame. "Kane, I know what I did was wrong. The job applications using your work experience, putting you down as a reference without asking. Carol showed me the paperwork about the tuition payments and the insurance, and everything you've been doing for this family. Son, I had no idea." He paused, and I could hear him crying quietly. "I called Marcus at Morrison Warehouse and apologized for what I said about you during my interview. I told him the truth about everything. My unemployment, your support of the family, my gambling, all of it. Kane, I've spent today calling every company where I lied on applications and withdrawing them with honest explanations. This was the accountability I'd been waiting for, but hearing Dad's complete breakdown gave me no satisfaction. I lost our house," he continued. "Carol gave us until Friday to find somewhere else to live. Amanda is staying in the dorms, and your mother and I are looking at a 1-bedroom apartment in Riverside that we can afford on my hardware store wages. Kane, I destroyed everything, including my relationship with my son, who was saving us. Dad, I said quietly, why are you calling me? Because I need to tell you that I was wrong about everything. You didn't take from this family, Kane. You gave us everything, and I was too proud and too scared to see it. I was scared that if I admitted I couldn't provide for my family, then I wasn't a man anymore. So I convinced myself that my problems were temporary, that my consulting story was basically true, that someone else was responsible for our troubles. Dad's honesty was more painful than his previous anger had been. I want to make this right, he said. I know I can't undo the damage, but I want to try. Kane, would you be willing to meet with your mother and me, not to ask for money or help, just to let us apologize properly, and maybe start rebuilding some kind of relationship? 3 days later, I sat across from my parents in a booth at Denny's restaurant, the same place where our family had celebrated my high school graduation 6 years earlier. Dad looked like he'd aged a decade in 2 months. Mom's eyes were red from crying, but she seemed calmer than Amanda had described. Kane. Mom began, I need to apologize for everything, but especially for calling you vindictive when you stopped helping us financially. I didn't understand that you'd been helping us for 3 years. I thought your leaving was just stubbornness about the argument with your father. Dad nodded, taking over the conversation with obvious difficulty. Son, I've been going to counseling with a financial advisor that Carol recommended. I'm learning to manage money honestly for the first time in my life. I got a second job doing weekend cleaning at an office building. It's not much, but between that and the hardware store, I can pay our rent and basic expenses without borrowing or gambling. Dad, what about the gambling? I asked directly. I've been attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings for 3 weeks, he replied without hesitation. I lost $8,000 online during my unemployment money we needed for basic expenses. I was convinced I could win enough to solve all our problems, but all I did was make everything worse, while you were working yourself into exhaustion to support us. Mom reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Kane, we want you to know that we understand what you sacrificed for this family. Amanda showed us bank statements and work schedules that prove you've been working 70-hour weeks for 3 years to pay our bills. We don't expect you to forgive us immediately, but we want to start making amends. What does that look like? I asked. Dad pulled out a folder of papers. I've calculated every dollar you spent supporting this family over the past 3 years. Tuition, insurance, mortgage, help, everything. It totals $87,400. Kane, I want to pay you back. Dad, you're making $10 an hour at a hardware store. How are you going to pay back $87,000? It'll take me 15 years at $50 per month, but I want to do it, he said firmly. I need to take responsibility for what I took from your life. I also wrote letters to Uncle Paul and the rest of the family explaining what really happened during my unemployment and acknowledging your support. They need to know the truth about which one of us was actually providing for this family. Mom added, we've also established a monthly family meeting where we discuss finances honestly. No more secrets, no more pride preventing us from asking for help appropriately, and no more taking anyone's contributions for granted. Over the following months, my parents kept their commitments in ways that surprised me. Dad maintained both his jobs and his Gamblers Anonymous attendance, slowly rebuilding his self-worth through honest work rather than elaborate deceptions. Mom took on additional shifts at Patterson's Grocery and began managing their budget with transparency that included sharing monthly statements with Amanda and me. Their one-bedroom apartment in Riverside was small, but clean furnished with second-hand items they'd chosen together. For the first time in my memory, their lifestyle accurately reflected their income, and they seemed more relaxed without the pressure of maintaining illusions. Amanda thrived during her final semester, supported by a combination of student loans, her coffee shop earnings, and a small monthly contribution I chose to make directly to her, rather than through family intermediaries. Her acceptance to medical school came with partial scholarships she'd earned through her strong academic performance. My own life continued improving in unexpected ways. Fletcher Accounting promoted me to senior associate after my supervisor noticed my increased availability and energy levels. Sarah and I began dating seriously, and she was impressed rather than judgmental when I explained my family situation and financial support history. Most surprisingly, Dad's nephew Jason, who'd learned the truth about my situation through family conversations, offered me a position with his growing construction management company. The salary was 40% higher than my Fletcher accounting job, with opportunities for advancement that matched my skills and work ethic. By Christmas, our family had developed new traditions that reflected our evolved relationships. Instead of the elaborate dinners Mom used to stress about affording, we gathered at my apartment for potluck meals, where everyone contributed what they could. Dad brought dishes he'd learned to cook during his budget-conscious months. Amanda shared stories from medical school, and Mom seemed genuinely relaxed for the first time in years. During Christmas dinner, Dad stood up unexpectedly and addressed the room. "I want to say something to Kane in front of everyone." He began, his voice steady but emotional. "This year, I learned that being a man doesn't mean having all the answers, or providing everything for your family by yourself. Real strength comes from acknowledging when you need help and appreciating people who support you." He paused, looking directly at me. "Kane, you spent 3 years being the man I should have been for this family. You sacrificed your comfort, your social life, and your future to keep us afloat, while I was too proud to admit I was failing. You never asked for credit, never demanded acknowledgement, and when I finally drove you away with my selfishness, you still protected my reputation with potential employers." Dad's voice broke slightly before he continued. "I want everyone here to know that Kane is the reason Amanda could pursue her education, the reason our family survived my unemployment, and the reason I eventually learned to take responsibility for my own failures. Son, thank you for loving us enough to support us, and thank you for loving us enough to stop enabling us when we needed to grow." The room was quiet except for Mom crying softly into her napkin. Most importantly, Dad concluded, "Thank you for showing me that real family doesn't take your sacrifices for granted. People who truly love you will fight to keep you, not assume you'll always be there no matter how they treat you." Amanda stood up and wrapped me in a hug that lasted several minutes. "My hero," she whispered, echoing the title of the photo album she'd given me, documenting my years of support through pictures she'd secretly taken of my exhausted arrivals at family dinners, my warehouse uniform glimpsed through car windows, and my proud smiles during her academic achievement celebrations. As I looked around my apartment that evening, comfortable furniture bought with money I'd earned, family members who now understood and appreciated my sacrifices, and a future built on honest relationships rather than hidden support, I realized I'd learned the most important lesson of my life. Helping people who don't value your help isn't love, it's enabling. Real family doesn't take your sacrifices for granted. Sometimes, you have to stop giving everything to teach people what you're actually worth. The people who truly love you will fight to keep you, not assume you'll always be there, no matter how they treat you. The past year had taught me that demanding recognition wasn't selfish, but necessary for healthy relationships. My family's growth had only been possible after I stopped enabling their illusions and forced them to confront reality. And my own happiness had only been achievable after I learned to value my own worth enough to expect others to value it too. Today, Dad has been making his $50 monthly payments for 8 months, never missing one, despite his limited income. Amanda graduated with honors and starts medical school next fall. Mom has been promoted to assistant manager at Patterson's Grocery. And I'm planning to propose to Sarah next month, confident that I understand the difference between love and sacrifice. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever found yourself sacrificing everything for family members who didn't appreciate your efforts? How did you handle the situation when people you love took your support for granted? What's the hardest part about setting boundaries with family, especially when you know they're struggling? Share your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences help other people realize they're not alone in these difficult family situations. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to hear more real-life stories about family dynamics and personal growth, and share this with anyone who might be struggling with similar challenges. Sometimes, we all need to hear that demanding respect isn't selfish. It's necessary. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you value your own worth in your relationships. Remember, the people who truly care about you will appreciate your sacrifices, not take them for granted.